Okay. Uh, I have my notes because I'm not gonna speak off the cuff, so I hope you don't mind if I'm looking here a little bit down as we speak. First of all, we just want to welcome you for coming today on behalf of the family, especially on Ketty and I, Anna's grandchildren, Zoe, Joshua, and Zachary, and Anna's great-grandchildren, Max and Henry, my husband, Terry, who couldn't be here, and Zoe's partner, Greg. And so we thank you for coming to celebrate Anna's life. I hope you had an opportunity to eat and drink, but if you didn't, there'll be more after. We do have, I'm going to start. We have some guest speakers this evening who will speak about some different facets of my mom's life. We're going to have Liz Hill from the Canadian-Cuban Friendship Association, Maxine Hermelin from the United Jewish People's Order, and Liz Rowley, the leader of the Communist Party of Canada. So I'm going to start things, though, with a brief history of her life. So who was Anna? And she was a force of nature. I could just stop right there. She was strong. I got a bunch of adjectives. Strong, brave, generous, open-hearted, bossy, controlling, loving, funny, and creative. And her story is one of sorrow and joy, of struggle and accomplishment. So if you read the obituary from last year, you know Mom was born in Toronto in 1933 to Macedonian immigrant parents. Her grandparents were, for the time, transgressive and progressive in some ways, atheists and socialists. But they were also traditional in some other ways relating to women and marriage. And so our grandmother, Vana, had an arranged marriage to my grandfather, Pando. It was not a happy marriage. And there's a reason I'm mentioning this, was because our mother didn't speak often of her childhood, but it was no secret that she despised her father, Pando. He was a cruel man, abusive, alcoholic, and despotic. And her home life was intense and really chaotic. And I believe that her personality was forged in the fire of her childhood, and it honed her passion for fighting injustice, but also for needing to control her world. School was another challenge for my mom. So for waspy teachers of her era, to immigrant children who maybe spoke with an accent or came from other places in the world, were frequently mean and dismissive to immigrant children. I don't know if a lot of people know, she was born left-handed, but was forced by coercive means, including tying her hand down, to be right-handed. And this affected, I think, her ability to write things down in that. I think the crossing of the brain was something that affected her. And but intelligent and creative. In that era, she was not given the opportunity to pursue an academic education. And the system assumed that immigrants' children were often not meant for intellectual pursuits, and so she was sent to Danforth Tech High School, where she was great at sewing, but her father forced her to leave school after grade 9 to go and work in the family restaurant. So you can see that a lot of her early life kind of led her quite a bit to feel keenly injustice, and being with her personality that she was born with, she was born to fight and struggle. So that was not going to stop her. So in her teens, Mom joined the National Federation of Labor Youth, aka the NFLY. Ketty and I were thinking, what was the NFLY? What was the NFLY? And then we realized what it was. So it happened to replace the Young Communist League in 1941 after it and the party were banned. So they transformed themselves into different organizations. So Mom staked her claim in the communist movement early and maintained it throughout her life. And you will hear more about that with Liz. So in those days, before cigarette smoking deepened her voice, and she did smoke, she quit several times, but when Josh was born, she finally gave it up and said, I got a grandchild now, I gotta stop. Mom had a beautiful soprano voice, and sang in various song groups with repertoires of progressive songs and folk music, some of which you would have heard this evening that my sister prepared over by the pictures. So when Ketty and I were growing up, this was the music that filled our household: Bulgarian folk tunes, the Weavers, Pete Seeger, Paul Robeson. Moving into her 20s, Mom left Canada behind for Bulgaria. And I don't know a lot about that time. I wish I did. You always think you have time to talk to people about things, and then you find out you don't. But I kind of imagine, in some ways, it was the happiest time of her life. You would think having Ketty and I was, but she was single, free, traveling, studying music, and enjoying a very lively social life, especially according to my aunt. I'm sorry, Mom. I never thought to ask her why she decided to come home, but I'm sure Ketty and I are glad she did. Back in Canada, Mom did two significant things. She joined the Communist Party, and in 1961, she married our father, a celebrated and much-loved progressive artist known as Avram. Mom loved Dad fiercely, and she took on the role of lover, mother, housewife, helpmeet, and worker. Progressive artists, however brilliant, are rarely rich. Throughout our growing up, Mom worked a variety of part-time jobs and found myriad ways to save money, with the exception of new shoes, which she knew was important because she had had poor shoes when she was a kid, so that was something that was always new. Most of our clothing were hand-me-downs from friends. She had one tube of lipstick literally forever. She had this gold tube of lipstick with red in it that she put on when she'd go out to a special event, and that's the only tube of lipstick I ever saw. She would cook a turkey on Sunday, and she would serve it in various disguises for the entire week, including, it was really disgusting, grinding it up and making a really yucky turkey pie. Ahead of her time, Mom rarely bought expensive processed foods except for pork and beans and yummy cans of Habitant pea soup. She saved the color comics from the Toronto Star to use as Christmas wrapping paper. But there were always money for concerts, for ballet classes, and trips to the theater. Mom also managed to squeeze in time to pursue her creative side with taking sculpture classes. She took pictures forever, home movies, which we have now on digital, and amateur theater with the Toronto Ensemble Theater. Mom also had to cope with Dad's health. Dad was hospitalized a couple of times with clinical depression. And when he became too ill to work, Mom took a bookkeeping course at George Brown College, which eventually led to her working for Open Circle Theatre at Adelaide Court. And yet, with all these responsibilities and challenges, Mom continued to contribute to the community. As a member of the Withrow Home and School, where Ketty and I went to elementary school, Mom spearheaded the formation and founding and funding of the After 4 program. The program provided free activities like ceramics, gymnastics, printmaking, and this was in like not a wealthy working class neighborhood, so this was a really important thing that she wanted to have everybody to have access to. She volunteered at Lord Dufferin's School for years, helping with the sewing classes. She was a literacy volunteer at Central Neighborhood House, and of course, she had her political work. Avram died in 1979, and Mom never spoke to us of her grief. She kept it private, but I imagine it was immense. She never remarried and, as far as we know, never had another relationship. With Dad's death, Mom moved into a new phase of her life. We moved from our home of 12 years to a subsidized unit in the newly built David B. Archer Cooperative. And when her bookkeeping job ended, Mom got the perfect job for her: receptionist secretary to the Bulgarian Consul General and the Trade Commission. It was a happy time for her, back in the cultural and political environment she relished. As the years flowed on, Mom experienced the births of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, spent summers at Nijvelt, visited with friends, played countless games of Scrabble, and drank countless cups of tea, as some of you will know. She traveled. She developed a passion for Cuba. She sponsored a showing of Avram's works, which is very meaningful to her, and generally tried to rule the world, as Josh and I and Ketty and Zoe will tell you. In her last years, Mom experienced many health challenges. She had diabetes, she had mobility issues, But although it limited her, she fought to the end to remain independent, active, and in control of her life. When Ketty and I, and many dear friends, who you know who you are here tonight, urged Mom to move into assisted living where she could be safer and cared for, she had many falls, it was a hard no from her. She made it clear she would leave home in a box before giving up her home and autonomy. And I'll be honest, she didn't have a good death. She had a fall, she had got COVID while in the hospital, and she had another fall, and this finally brought this indomitable person down. There's no point, though, in saying if only. No one could make Mom do anything she didn't want to do. If you are that person, put your hand up, because I'd like to see who you are. That was just how she rolled. Ketty and I reflected on the lessons we learned from Mom. We remembered how Mom would check the oranges and lemons to make sure they weren't outspanned fruit from South Africa. Lettuce and grapes from the States had to have the United Farm Workers logo to make it into our grocery cart. If she heard racist, anti-Semitic, or homophobic language bandied about anywhere by anyone in any situation, and I'm telling you, I've seen this, she called it out. She told off kids playing with war toys. She took us marching against war and for peace, and had us handing out unpopular political literature at election time. She never shied away from doing what was right, no matter the cost. And that is the significant lesson we learned: to be fearless, to do what's right instead of what's easy, to resist conforming just to fit in. And honestly, that can be a real pain in the ass. But we're proud to follow Mom's lead, and we miss her very much. So now I'd like to invite our first speaker up, Liz Hill from the Canadian-Cuban Friendship Association.
Well, if there's anyone here who didn't know Anna, just listening to that would make you wish you did. And I am so glad that I did know Anna from a few different points of view. I'm going to have to look at notes. As I was told I have about 5 minutes, and I think I need about 5 hours, but I will follow the thing. Anyway, I knew Anna in a few different capacities. I knew her in the Young Communist League when I was about 16. She was a little bit, about 10 years older than I. And I also knew her through the Camp Nijvelt and the UJPO. But I'd like to speak about Anna in Cuba. Anna was a member of the Canadian-Cuban Friendship Association, Toronto, which was founded in 1977. She was a more recent member, about the last 15 years. She was a very strong supporter of Cuba, and those aren't just words, they were actions. The cause of Cuba was one of her many causes, and that she took up with conviction and commitment. And as a member of the CCFA, Anna attended meetings, dinners, events, rallies at the US consulate protesting the blockade, which is now more than 60 years old. And she would speak up confidently at meetings, asking questions and raising issues. She was very generous with her time and in fundraising to support the various campaigns for hurricane relief, medical supplies, and the organization itself. I remember once how she lectured us about being more open to recruiting new members, and how we should not just be shy to ask someone to join. And she demonstrated by actually speaking to people and asking them would they join. So in Anne's name, I'll invite anybody here who would like to join the CCFA, that we're certainly open to new members. We need a strong voice. Anna traveled to Cuba several times. She traveled twice on the Che Guevara Volunteer Work Brigade. and many times on holiday with family and friends. We traveled together about 6 times, me and Anna sharing a room, going to various places. And I've got many stories to tell about that. There's a photo album out at the front table that I brought of 1 week that we spent, where we had quite a program. It was 2014. We visited a friend of mine, Peter Valdez, in a large neuroscience center in Havana. And this neuroscience center has a plaque dedicated to Dr. Norman Bethune. Anna knew Peter was a great admirer of Dr. Norman Bethune. He admired him because of Bethune's international medical work, which Cubans have done too. Bethune was in Spain and China. Anna had some vintage magazines. I think they were Life magazines. I have some pictures of her giving them to Pedro. These very precious materials that she presented to Pedro with a story about them all. And I found out later that Anna was also generous, made a generous donation to help the center. Anna and I both participated in the 25th Che Guevara Volunteer Work Brigade, and it went to the eastern part of Cuba for 2 weeks. One of the things near the occupied US occupied base in Guantanamo, we met in a room with a group of border guards. I'm not sure that's the correct name, but border guards. And they told us about their job was to maintain a watch on the base to protect Cuba. The Americans refused to leave that base. So while we were in a room sitting at a table with about 20 young people around, Anna put up her hand and said, "I want to ask a question." She always had a way if everyone would stop and listen to what is your question? And she said, "I look around this room and you're all young people, but most of you are women. There's very few men. You're all women. Why is that? Why are there so many women that are doing this kind of work as border guards?" And one young Cuban woman answered, and she put her hand up. She wanted to answer, and she said, "I'm 19 years old." And she admired Vilma Espin. Some of you may have heard of that name. Vilma was the head of the Cuban Federation of Women, and she was a role model. She also fought alongside Fidel and Che Guevara in the revolution in the mountains. And she advanced gender equity in Cuba, very well known for that. So it was a very moving answer, how proud she was of this leader. And that's why so many women were interested in doing this work for Cuba. Everybody applauded, but they were applauding both the question and the answer. It was a very, very inspiring moment. Always fighting for justice and always bringing out the best in people and always finding a way to help. Anna was very modest and didn't like bringing attention to herself. I have many, many stories about Scrabble, about going to thrift stores, about going to garage stores, about going to Dairy Queen, many, many stories, and they're all very precious. And that was Anna. It was a very, very good that I had the opportunity to spend so much time with her in these last few years, especially at Nivelt in Cuba and here in Toronto. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay. Okay.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome up now Maxine Hermelin from the United Jewish People's Order.
I love the beautifully colorful picture you painted of Anna to start off our evening. Anna made room in her life for so much: her family, her friends, and her causes, of which there were many. In that regard, the United Jewish People's Order community was a perfect fit for her. And I am grateful to contribute to this event celebrating Anna's life by speaking about her involvement in our community for some 70-plus years. Many of those decades through which I worked alongside Anna and also came to consider her a dear friend. The UJPO and its institutions, the Morris Winchevsky School and Camp Nivelt, have a long and proud history of promoting progressive secular Jewish culture and education with a strong commitment to social justice, upholding world peace, workers' rights, women's rights, opposing anti-Semitism and all forms of racism, supporting indigenous rights, climate justice, and LGBTQ+ rights, struggles, and activism related to Israel-Palestine are among UJPO's priorities. Anna's values of justice, equality, and peace were integrally meshed with those of the UJPO and its institutions. She was one of the most principled people I've ever known, steadfastly true to her values and beliefs. Anna lived her life every day and in every way in alignment with those values, never veering, never doubting, always confident and clear about her beliefs. Here's some background about how Anna's connections to UJPO came about and evolved. As you heard from Dvoira, when Anna was a member of NFLY, the National Federation of Labor Youth, probably in the early 50s, she was involved with a pageant, and that led her to connecting with the UJPO Theater Workshop, which presented productions with a broad diversity. Later, Anna was a member of UJPO's Toronto Ensemble Theatre. In these groups' productions, Anna played a range of roles, including a Sholem Aleichem play reading and The Blood Knot, which was entered into a competition. And not surprisingly, Anna helped with many behind-the-scenes needs. Continuing with Anna's cultural involvement, Anna sang with the UJPO Youth Singers, which was the precursor to the Travelers, which was founded in 1953. The UJPO Youth Singers' repertoire was largely labor-oriented folk music, like Joe Hill and The Banks Are Made of Marble. They performed for Nivelt and UJPO events, as well as going out on the road, performing for audiences across Canada. Later, around the mid-50s and 60s, Anna sang with the Toronto Jewish Folk Choir. And Anna remained a stalwart supporter of the choir throughout its long and esteemed history. Again, as you've heard, Anna and Avram spent many summers together at Camp Nivelt with Dvoira and Ketty and Zalman in his wild teenage years. Moving from cottage to cottage over the 3 hills of Nivelt, Anna eventually settled in her cottage in the Hill 2 Circle, conveniently across from mine. In recent years, Anna would hold court at her cottage, where there was a revolving door of visitors. The Scrabble board was always ready for a game. The sewing machine was always set up, just in case a rental cottage needed new curtains made or a program needed costumes or props. So many images of Anna come to mind, many of them at Nivelt. Playing Scrabble, which she won often, and I even have a score book that we found just this past summer that verifies that. Hosting delicious dinners in her cabin, reading or often napping on her comfortable lounge chair, with the radio blaring music in the background. Sewing the quilt at Nivelt as part of the Oy die Welt community play. It's definitely not the same in the Hill 2 circle without Anna. Anna was a devoted member of UJPO, participating in many programs and standing and marching alongside members at rallies and marches countering injustices. At our events, Anna would always voice her opinion, saying exactly what was on her mind, never mincing any words. When I was on staff at the Yanovsky Center, Anna earned the status of Star Volunteer. For several years, once a week, rain or shine, you could count on Anna to come to the office to volunteer. One of the regular tasks was mailing our newsletters to our members and readers, where Anna would take charge and supervise the group of volunteers for the task at hand. Anna would often notice that I was always running around looking for pens or paper and notepads, and one day she showed up and presented me with this gift, which I will model for you. It's a handmade little pouch, and in it I could put all of the necessary items so that I would no longer be searching for them. It's quite a treasure. Anna would happily help with whatever was needed, whether it was going over membership lists or helping to prepare craft activities for our Shula students. Those days in the office occasionally turned into dinners together, often with my family, who rarely missed opportunities to visit with Anna. One year, we had a Shula project, and we needed cloth bags for all the kids. Anna immediately volunteered to sew the bags to save the Shula the expense. Here's one sample of some 50 or 60 bags that Anna sewed. In 2010, the UJPO had the opportunity to honor Anna along with two other strong women in the organization, Bea Levis and my mother, Lee Schechter, at a celebratory tea. To be able to bestow upon Anna an abundance of well-deserved appreciation and praise was so special, even though she was resistant and reluctant to agree to being the center of attention. Outlook, Canada's progressive Jewish magazine, was near and dear to Anna's heart. I happened to find an issue with Avram on the cover. UJPO was a strong supporter of the publication. For many years, Anna was president of Toronto's Outlook Committee, hosting committee meetings in her home. And you could count on Anna to raise support for Outlook at every bungalow holders meeting at Nivelt, at every UJPO meeting or convention at the Yanovsky Center, at our community's tables, at events such as International Women's Day. Anna was committed, again as you've heard, to ensuring that her beloved Avram's art would live on. To that end, an important relationship was established with Anna Hudson, art curator at York University, which is now where much of Avram's art resides. When UJPO sponsored a tour of Avram's art across Canada, Anna traveled to Winnipeg to speak at the event there. Avram's art was featured at the Ashkenaz Festival at Toronto's Harbourfront, and at the Varley Gallery in Markham, where Anna also spoke proudly. Anna was a treasured friend. A truer friend you could not find. Anna's generosity and kindness knew no bounds. Our families had a very close connection, and that friendship extended up and down through the generations. Anna had special relationships with my parents, my children, and my grandson. Over the years, our families have shared many occasions, both happy and sad. Anna was famous for her annual gathering around Christmas, with a house full of friends and a table full of her delicious homemade offerings. Anna's gifts for all occasions were always thoughtful and personal, with beautiful, touching messages, and always wrapped in fabric, long before recycling was a thing. And we can all recall Anna's gift for storytelling, making memories come alive in vibrant detail. On behalf of the United Jewish People's Order, our warmest thoughts to Devorah, Terry, and Ketty, to Joshua, Zoe, and Greg, and to Max and Henry. Anna marched to the beat of her own drum and lived her life true to her principles. She walked the walk and talked the talk. Anna definitely made a difference in the world. Her influence and example will long be remembered in the UJPO community and wherever she left her mark. What a privilege to have had her in our lives. I'd like to call on Judy Goldie, who has a presentation to make on behalf of the UJPO.
Oh, they're framed. Oh, how nice. Okay. I started painting a picture of Anna here in Toronto. I was going to give it to her as her birthday present. And it was based on a series of pictures I had taken of her when we were together, of course, playing Scrabble. And I was going down to Mexico, and I thought that would be the perfect time to finish it. And I started working on it down there, and unfortunately, she passed away before I could come back to Toronto. But I did finish the portrait. It was painted with a lot of love, a lot of love. Anna's passing has left a big hole in my life, and I really miss her. But it does give me some pleasure to see the painting that I did of her on my wall. Some people on the executive of the UJPO saw the portrait and asked if they could make copies for Devorah and Ketty for the celebration of life. So I was very appreciative that they liked the painting and that they offered to do that. So I'd like to present these to Devorah and Ketty. I hope you'll enjoy it. I know. I know. And I did it gladly to both of you.
We have, oops, sorry, let's get this better here. We have one more guest speaker, and then the last thing will be Joshua, Anna's grandson, who has a few Baba stories to tell. But first, we have the leader of the Communist Party of Canada, Liz Rowley.
Good evening, everyone. Need glasses. Anna was born in 1933. The worst part of the Depression, when jobs and money were scarce, and local fascists were on the rampage against Jews, communists, and immigrants in what became known as the Battle of Christie Pitts. Avram was one of the many communists, Jews, and trade unionists who fought the fascists that day. Anna was just 9 years old in 1942, during the darkest days of World War II, when it looked like the fascists might win. She was just 12 when the US dropped the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and just 13 when Churchill dropped the Iron Curtain in 1946, opening up the Cold War, the arms race, and the violent attacks on the Soviet Union, socialism, and the Communist parties. The daughter of progressive Macedonian immigrants who were active in the left wing of that community, it didn't take Anna long to decide which side she was on. And as soon as she was old enough, she joined the National Federation of Labor Youth, NFLY, about which you've heard quite a bit this evening, the Communist Youth Organization, which later became the Young Communist League, and had been the Young Communist League before it was declared illegal, as mentioned earlier. This is where she learned the art and science of Marxism-Leninism and the historic role of the working class. Although we can't be certain, Anna was very likely a participant in the 1947 5-cent candy bar strike, organized by NFLY to protest a hike in the price of chocolate bars from 5 to 8 cents. Just outrageous. Thousands of school kids marched down main streets in cities across Canada, including 500 who marched down Bloor Street, vowing to boycott the greedy candy bar companies until a 5-cent bar was restored. This would have been the beginning of the thousands of miles that Anna marched over the years, wearing out many pairs of shoes, in support of peace and nuclear disarmament, against the US wars in Korea and Vietnam, in solidarity with Cuba, Nicaragua, Chile, Venezuela, with the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, with the Palestinian people's struggles for a Palestinian state, and in support of striking workers with food, by the way. The unemployed unions of the 1980s and earlier, also with food. The women's movement, fighting for equality, and not least, the numerous bus trips to Ottawa to demand that Liberal and Tory governments do this or that, or conversely, stop doing this or that. Chief among these mass protests was the historic 1976 general strike, which brought 1 million workers out on strike across the country, shutting down workplaces and public transit right across the country. Anna was there, marching with the party in the largest political strike in Canadian history. That's something. She was also at the massive peace demonstrations and the anti-globalization demonstrations in the 1990s, as well as in the protests against the U.S. invasion of Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya, and Syria. She was also, if she were here today, she would be protesting the new war in the Middle East and supporting the UJPO's call for a ceasefire and a permanent political solution as set out in the UN resolutions. We just know she would do that. Anna and her husband Avram met through the NFLY and their common interest in the arts. Anna had a fine soprano voice and was an accomplished singer, following a stint studying music in Bulgaria. She was a member of the NFLY Singers, where Avram was a musician. It didn't take long for him to accompany her right up to the altar. It's unclear whether it was Avram or someone else who recruited her into the Communist Party, but she didn't need much encouragement. That's clear. Her experience in the N-Fly had generated a strong and lifelong conviction in socialism, the working class, and the need for a revolutionary workers' party. She joined at a young age and remained a member throughout her life and the turbulent decades that defined it. Anna traveled to Poland in 1955 as a Canadian participant in the World Festival of Youth and Students. She traveled to Cuba, too, many times in her life, including on a Che Guevara volunteer work brigade when she was well into her 80s. Undaunted by the heat, she was an active volunteer worker and a well-loved brigadista by her much younger compañeros. As you've already heard, Anna was active throughout her life in the UJPO, at Camp Nivelt, and was president of the Outlook in Toronto for a time. She was also an active supporter of Cuba, of the Canadian-Cuban Friendship Association. She was generous to a fault, assisting and supporting many organizations fighting for just causes, including the Young Communist League. She was a very kind person who helped many individuals as well who were struggling. She'd been there, she knew. But she also knew the problem was a rotten system. And that's where she put all her efforts for fundamental change. Outspoken and blunt, Anna was a critical thinker, an organizer, and an activist, and a reader, a major supporter of People's Voice, and before it, the Canadian Tribune. She followed political events in Canada and the world and could debate with the best of them, and she did. We were in the same party club for many years, and there were many debates in which Anna was in the forefront. Anna was also a good cook who cooked many meals for hungry activists and for party banquets and fundraisers over many years. One of the last times I saw her was at a barbecue in my backyard. Anna was sitting in her walker in my kitchen while I unpacked the salad she had made, accompanied by various dressings and toppings for the masses. She also worked at many of the party's bazaars and fundraisers, preparing food and selling it, and all sorts of goods that people might buy. Some of these were at Palermo, at the Ukrainian camp, usually in August, that included music, speeches, games, swimming, and sometimes soccer, and a dance at the end of the night, and there was also a beer tent. Anna had high standards and expected the same from others. She was impatient with dawdlers who couldn't get to the point in party meetings. Well, you can imagine. Though she was herself an attentive participant in the serious political discussions and decisions that had to be made at those meetings. She knew Fred Rose, one of two communists elected to the House of Commons, and other luminaries of the communist movement. She also knew Eva Kula, the no-nonsense office manager at 24 Cecil Street, who was gatekeeper to the second floor where the party leadership worked. She also knew Fran Sedgwick, who also worked in the office and was much more flexible than Eva about letting you get to the inner sanctum. Anna helped out at the office from time to time with stuffing and mailing hundreds of letters or other office duties that required additional help. Nothing was too minor or mundane for Anna to do. She jumped in to help, whatever the job. Those tables of volunteers that she was a part of were a source of enormous intelligence about who was who and what was what in the Toronto organization for a newly arrived kid like me in 1975. Like many of our members, Anna and Avram handed out thousands of leaflets over the years in election campaigns, peace marches, and on issues like Canada's energy policy, foreign policy, free trade, Quebec, Indigenous and immigrant rights, the right to strike and organize, and so on. They also distributed the Canadian Tribune, sometimes at factories and plant gates, so the party could be seen, heard, and read, R-E-D, read, through, through the media blackout. Avram was a well-known artist and a communist in the labor and progressive movement who was known for his painting, including a triptych of his version of Picasso's Guernica, the aerial bombing of refugees by German and Italian fascists in 1937 Republican Spain. We were very proud to exhibit this painting depicting the horrors of war and fascism in our office on Cecil Street until 1991. Avram was also known for his chalk talks, which were cartoon depictions of workers and bosses explaining how workers were exploited and how surplus value and profit was squeezed out of them. The bosses almost always resembled the bankers in the game of Monopoly. David Abramovich told me that Avram and Anna could sometimes be found on picket lines, with Avram doing chalk talks on the back of a truck, with strikers gathered round. Anna was very interested in the arts, was supportive of progressive young artists, including in her old family, and was very proud and protective of Avram's paintings, drawings, and sketches. A few years ago, there was a public exhibition of Avram's works, well, several of them, as you've heard from other speakers. The Communist Party was built on the shoulders of veterans, Anna and Avram Yanovsky. They helped to shape the revolutionary movement and working class history in Canada. We salute their contribution, and we remember them with great gratitude and affection today. On behalf of the Communist Party, I'd like to extend deepest sympathy to Anna's daughters, Dvora and Ketty, and to their families, and to Anna's sister, Polly. Thank you.
Hello. To all of you looking at me, my name is Josh. And before you can all say it together now, I remember you when you were this tall. Yes, okay, we've got that one out of the way. Wonderful. Okay. Seeing as many of you did meet me, probably because you met me through Baba, and you remember me from being a child at Camp Nivelt, which was about the best place as a child to grow up I could possibly imagine. My childhood summers were essentially Calvin and Hobbes minus the talking living tiger. I had friends, I had an outdoor area to run around, and I had a loving grandmother there, providing anything a young child could ever want. She was, to be honest, perfect in that sense. I thought I'd share a few stories. Some of them are my own, one of them is from another, that really highlight who Baba was as an individual. Specifically, a lot of my memories with her revolve around food. I'm sure that doesn't surprise you, particularly bacon. That was a common one. And making sure that I never left her place without a bag so full of food that it would often be spilling out onto the TTC when I tried to go home. That was a common one. She loved giving me Zelnick, including one time freeze wrapping it in a bag and making me take it back in my suitcase back to Vernon, British Columbia. I kid you not, that really happened. It was something. But it was pretty good Zelnick, to be fair. She made a really great one. Most of those memories, though, and we've talked about this as well, they happened at Nivelt. And I think to anyone who knew her, I think that was truly maybe the place she seemed happiest in the world. And from my perspective, I think that was as well. We all remember her running the bingo at the nights there, up at the front, turning the crank, and of course, her least favorite joke on earth, before. And we'd all say, before what? And she'd look at us and go, you need new material. And when the next one would come up, B6. And we went, B6 what? Okay. And she wouldn't even acknowledge it and move on. I can still hear her saying, though, after someone would cry out, bingo! Hold your cards, let's wait and see if it's a good bingo. We gotta check it first. And to be honest, she was pretty good about that because there were a lot of not good bingos, if I remember correctly. And boy, did you want to win those 15 cents worth of pennies so you could go buy an ice cream bar from the snack truck at the front. But to an 8-year-old kid, that was about as cool as it got, and the fact that it was my baba running the bingo just seemed about as cool as you could get. This isn't my story, but I think this probably sums up Baba and who she was as a whole. This would have been, I don't quite remember which summer this would have been, but Zach and I were in Nijvelt. And as many of you know, you get those strange nights there at Nijvelt where there's the giant rain and thunderstorms that just seem to hang over the camp. Zach and Rowan were out wandering around having an evening, and they ended up at Rowan's cottage, to which they were watching a movie or TV show. I'm not really sure what it was. I don't know that part of the story. But I know that it was an intense one. And they could hear the thunder and lightning all around them outside. And as the movie was growing in intensity, at a big peak moment, they heard a bang! The door opened, and illuminated in a bolt of lightning was Baba Anna's figure. And she screamed, Zachary, Rowan, what the hell are you two doing in here? Except she didn't say hell. You all know what she said. You could have been killed by lightning inside a cottage. But yeah, that was what she thought. And then after she'd calmed down, she went, well, do you need anything? Some food? Chips? Can I make you some bacon? Do you need to come back to the cottage? And that truly was Baba right there. You could go from anger, but anger from love, to pure love in about 10 seconds, and it was just because of how much she cared for those around her. So I'd like to thank you all for coming this evening. I hope that those stories, you agree, sum up the individual she was, and I'd like to thank everybody who spoke this evening as well. That was truly heartfelt, and it was wonderful for me to hear some things that I had never known about my own grandmother as well. So thank you, and thank you all for coming.
Okay, so last but not least, we still have this place for a while, till 9-ish at least, before we have to clean up. There's tons of food, because you know my mom, like if there wasn't enough food to carry away in trucks afterwards, you didn't have enough. So please, if you're still hungry, or even if you're not, help yourself to some more food. But also, on the table in the kitchen area, so there's still plates and things around, and there's some tin foil there, and there's some little bags. I am not joking. If you wish to take some things home with you, please do. So thank you. Thank you again for coming. We love you all for being here. And thanks. Help yourselves. Thank you.